This person obviously is
60.
I'm just going to refer
Welcome everyone to the Salem Township Planning Commission, July 15th, 2019. Meeting is called to order at 7:30. If you'll stand for the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag
of the United States of America, and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
All right. Mr. Secretary.
Mark Con. Mark Con.
Here.
Daryl Lewandowski. Not here. Absent. PJ McLaughlin is excused.
She's, yes.
Pam Merlot.
Here.
Bruce Reed here. Robert Rizzo.
Here.
And Dan McGarry.
there.
Okay. Approval of the agenda.
Approval of the agenda. Motion to approve the agenda as presented for the July 15th, 2019.
Do we have a second? I'm sure we do. Do we have a second? Thank you. Okay, the approval, all those in favor of approving the agenda as submitted, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? None. Agenda passes. Number 5, public comment. Okay, no comment yet. Chairperson comment. None. New business items. Zoning ordinance update with some with discussion. Paul, would you like to do a brief, just kind of overview of what we're looking at? Because I'm
Yes.
sure everyone has read it.
I would be happy to. So since we didn't have any site plan submittals, as you know, we put together a planning priorities list at the beginning of the year in January, and then updated that again in May, and added some items that we would look at when we had the opportunity to do it. So since we had the opportunity, we decided we'd tackle a couple of those priority items in the form of zoning ordinance amendments that we wanted to look at. The ones that you have in front of you today are wind, solar, landscape berms, and some general cleanup items. So I think wind energy was brought up as something that we wanted to look into. So I did a quick audit of the ordinance. We do have a section in the ordinance that deals with wind energy. So it's relatively thorough. I put a memo together for you talking about what kind of things you'd want to be looking at, the types of situations that you would want to regulate, how you'd want to regulate them. There are 2 different types that we look at primarily. One would be private systems that somebody would put at a residential home or something, typically smaller scale, less costly. Additionally, there would be agricultural wind energy systems, which might be used on a farm to either pump water or produce electricity. And then the third is a utility scale type of wind energy system. And those tend to be the larger ones. Sometimes you see those up north if you go traveling with the huge turbines. They're relatively costly. And so those are all regulated in different ways. Certainly we want to provide provisions to allow for them, but we also want to make sure that we have appropriate regulations in place to deal with issues of noise, safety, aesthetics, etc. In my audit of the ordinance, it appears that your ordinance does do all of those things. And so there were a couple minor suggestions that, when we get into the discussion of this, we can get into a little bit more. Do you want me to kind of go through all of these at once, or do you want to take each one of them at a time? It might be best just to take each one of them at a time.
Yeah.
So with the wind piece then, many of the other ordinances that I looked at allowed for the private as an accessory use as opposed to making it go through the public hearing process or the special land use process. Seems to make sense because then there are the regulations that they would be looked at, so to ensure administratively then that they meet these regulations. And then the larger kind of utility scale would have to go through that special use permit process. And there are provisions to make sure they're set back appropriately, that limits the number that you can have, I think to 2 per property. You have to have a minimum of 2 acres to even establish one, but then to get a second one, you have to have at least 40 acres. And so I believe that 2 is the limit. And then they obviously have to be set back. There's 150-foot setback for any fall concerns, et cetera. So I'm happy to discuss this to whatever extent you'd like to at this point.
Okay.
I need glasses.
All right, yeah, better get those.
For your suggestions and whatnot, I read all through this. Are all these kind of standard for our area?
Yes, yeah.
Is that where you got all that stuff?
Yeah, so I looked at a number of different ordinances, and they're slightly different, but deal with the same kinds of things. So, like I said, you've got this in place. The one suggestion that I did have would be that you might want to consider making the private ones on an individual lot or on a farm lot administrative. And there's one addition that I had under B that actually doesn't make sense. I meant to take that out, so that's erroneous. The added language under B, ignore that, please.
With the other WECS approval, the whole thing?
No, just the green part, the underlying green part that says not located in the AR district. We don't actually permit them anywhere except in the AR district unless that's something that you want to consider.
Okay. So was the sound of 55 decibels, was that standard too? Or was that where did that number come from?
I believe so. I think that at the time when this technology was starting to kind of become popular back around 2008 or so, there were kind of some standards that were developed through the industry, and that's what populated many of these ordinances.
Well, I just had a question. It seems like it's kind of restrictive. You can have 40 acres and only one wind turbine?
Up to 2 once you get to 40 acres.
It seems kind of restrictive.
You can have 1 cow for every 2 acres in this county, and then once you get above 10, you can have as many as you want. You know, and if it's, I don't know, I guess kind of, I look at it as, you've got a waterfall on your property, you're gonna limit a person how many water wheels they could have or something. I mean, it's, I agree. I think that should be, a per acre or something like that. But if a person wants to do that to gather energy,
So you'd like to increase the potential number?
I don't. If it's gathering energy from property you own, it's like, let's go to the extreme of it. If you drill down, you hit oil or natural gas. Are you gonna sit there and say, oh, you can only take 20 drums of oil out of your ground every day? No, take as much as you want. I don't know.
I go back to what the standard is, where those numbers came from. That's
Yeah,
all.
what's the point of restricting it? What is the end that those means get to? I don't see anything. If it's not noisy or aesthetics.
Well, apparently they are noisy.
Well, they're noisiest on windy days, so I'll go after that one as well. You're standing at the property line hearing wind whip past your ear, and you're pointing a decibel meter at a wind turbine. Well, yeah, but the leaves are crunching,
I think there's also a cost in there too, a significant cost.
So I'm certainly not an expert on the areas that are the best at generating wind energy. I have seen some maps where they highlight the areas throughout the state that have the highest potential. So I speculate that some of this is kind of self-governing, if you will, in that if somebody is going to put the investment into building something like this, they target those areas where there's high potential for conversion of wind into energy.
Yeah, there's gonna be some sort of limit of returns on it, but.
And I don't believe, just conjecturally looking around this area and looking at those maps, that this is a high wind energy area.
I think when it comes to the number, you go from the safety aspect and say, you know, hey, if one falls, can it hit into another, that type of thing. And so if a person's got the breadth and width of their property, then, you know, put a dot matrix there, that as much as you want.
Well,
Just go from the safety side.
it's up to you all to
Yeah, yeah.
decide what direction you want to go with this, and if there are questions that arise out of this discussion, like if there's any kind of convention to why there would be a certain number or not, I can certainly do the research on that.
I think we don't know enough about that yet, so maybe that would be a good idea. We could all put in our ideas and we could all discuss what we think, but I don't think any of us really know why. I think we should know more.
I suggest a field trip to Palm Desert. Got a bunch of them out
You
there.
can go to
Palm Springs, California.
127,
Yeah,
there's
that's
a
what
bunch of
they've
them
had
out
for
there.
30 years out
They're
there.
big and
The
they're
entire
ugly.
planning commission goes in attendance today.
They've
Should have
got,
a-
they've got thousands.
Huh?
They're not ugly. When it's open farmland.
Discussion.
But there's nobody living there.
What's
It's
there?
in, between the mountains.
You know, to create a problem, that when they're twirling, you go by and you can stop on the side, I don't hear them.
I've been right up
Yeah, I don't know.
next to one here. But they, you know, I talked to one of the engineers on it, and he gave me all the statistics on the electricity that they produce and everything. You know, for Palm Springs, it saved them a lot of money, you know, on electricity. But people don't like them because they kill birds. People don't like the looks of them. So they try to usually put them in remote areas. And when you start getting into the township and you start thinking about proximity to other properties, you think about the aesthetic considerations. And I don't know about the noise. When I was next to one, I didn't hear any noise, but they say that they can get noisy, so I don't know.
Okay, so we agree that we don't really know enough. Go ahead.
Well, no, just, the only thought was, of course, you limited that they have to bring it for commercial use to the board, right? So for residential use, again, I agree about limiting the number of them, but to the extent that the electricity I'm producing is consumed within the property. So if I'm generating a lot of electricity for the purpose of refeeding the grid to, you know, get a rebate of my electric bill, if that's even possible anymore, but.
I'll disagree with that once again. That's live free or die. You got the means to do it, you can pump that back in.
That might be, I know people
Then you're
that,
turning into a commercial use then.
So there is a difference between, everything has to go back on the grid, the way that it's set up. So unless you just have a closed system where when it's windy, you're producing electricity, most people who are putting up these systems are tying it into the grid, but on a residential scale, they just sell it to the grid and they buy it back, so it offsets their cost.
Right.
The utility scale where you're actually producing commercial.
And there will be battery systems and capacitor systems in there, because when you gotta dump it in there, you gotta dump it in there. You gotta have a place to get it. You can't push back to the grid that hard, right?
Yeah, because everybody
So, I
wants
mean,
different battery systems.
Yeah, we're not gonna be in the business of going, checking the battery charge rates or something at people's residences.
So anyway, it's my understanding that most people, when they put in these systems, whether they're solar or wind energy, they're hooking up to the grid so that they can get power when it's not windy and not sunny. But if they're hooked up to the grid, they have to sell it to DTE or whomever.
I understand that, but at some point in time, I mean, how many can you put up, how many windmills can you use to produce electricity, and where do we draw, my point is, where do we draw the line between this is, you know, for commercial use versus you're producing enough power to take care of yourself, and that's maybe a few bucks, no big deal, but I'm saying it's, you know, we don't want to create a mini farm.
If they're selling it back, they're making income, right?
Well,
And they're paying taxes on that, right?
I don't know, do you know? And the only reason I asked that is
Detroit
because
Edison keeps track of it, and you want to break zero, and
I know Detroit Edison also gives people a very, very, very hard time in trying to make a buck or get gain out of it.
and then
Because I
Detroit
know
Edison
people that
also
have fought them for a
loves it
couple
when you get to
years.
put in, because then they don't have to run as big as systems from their power stations, because they got a local system putting in. you know? Instead of running huge systems from here to here, well, you got some guy local, guess what? That's downsized. They love it for those reasons as
But
well.
my question to you is, do you know that? Because I know people who've been fighting with DTE for years who did not want them to do that and contribute and make money and help the community. That's why I say that.
Yeah, well.
So is that your theory or?
Well, when you own the monopoly, do you want to give it up?
Of course not, you know.
Okay.
So that's
welcome
DTE.
to- welcome
Right,
to
but that's not what you're
capitalism.
saying.
No, I know, but Bill, it's kept track of. You know every kilowatt hour that goes back in, you know what comes back to you. You know, that transfers right into cash money.
I think we don't know enough about this in
Yeah.
regards to numbers before we can do anything, so I say we move on.
Next subject.
So I don't know the specific answer to how we draw the line between a private system and a commercial system. It is defined that way in the ordinance. So I think that if somebody came to us with a proposal that walked like a duck and smelled like a duck, we'd recognize that it was a utility production scale versus a private use.
You know, I'm all about, you know, green energy and stuff like that, but to the extent of, I didn't also buy a property next to a commercial
I understand.
based.
Well, so at this point, if you have 2 acres, you can have 1.
Well,
If you get up to 40 acres, you can have 2. So if we're going to talk about increasing the potential number, then we can certainly look at how we verify whether or not it's a production for private use versus trying to do utility scale. Does that satisfy what you're interested in?
I mean, I just want to make sure we got some means of checks and balances.
For giggles, when you say it's 70 feet high, is that to the axis or is that like the top of the arc?
Top of the arc. That's the way it's defined in the ordinance.
So you're talking like a 50-foot diameter blade.
I don't know what the engineering details would be behind the height of a tower that would support a 50-foot blade, but yeah, the height restriction is to the top of the blade at its highest point.
So, the other question I had was regarding the, back to the safety side of it. It's not highly defined in here. Are the standards that you're referencing ones that update and will continue to? If the standard updates, then so does our ordinance. Again, meaning, you know, you've got power that you're generating and moving across. Obviously, electrical standards are protecting people, but again, do we have enough in there for safety?
That's a good point. I will look at that.
Paul, you got 2 acres to 40 acres in here. I assure you, 2 acres, not for me. Because I have 2.1 acres. I wouldn't want to see a guy right next door with another one of them things. I'm in favor of it, I think it's wonderful, but I think it should be a minimum of 10 acres at least for one. That's
Okay.
2, because you look like you're getting hammered here if anybody decides to head out a place, 2 acres, here comes a windmill.
Okay, and so just to be clear, these are existing standards. This is in your ordinance now.
Yeah.
Okay.
Okay, so to the extent that you want to change anything, we can do that, but the 2 acres is only for agricultural districts. And the height restriction is currently such that it can't be higher than the height restriction in the district. So if you're doing a single-family residential house in an agricultural district, I believe the height restriction is 40 feet. And so the height restriction on a windmill on a single-family lot in the agricultural district would be 40 feet. You can go up to, for agricultural use, you can go up to 75 feet. So anything that you would see in a residential application.
Okay.
Thank you.
Who wants to see your smiling face?
So anything would be restricted based on the height restriction, so it wouldn't be taller than the tallest house.
Just quick, are most of the 2 acre minimums here, are they, most of them that ag residential zoning?
Ag residential does have a 2 acre minimum, that's correct.
So most of them, the homes that are on 2 acre minimums are zoned ag residential?
Most of the township is zoned ag residential, yeah. You get into a couple higher density areas when you get closer to like Godvinson and North Territorial area. If you look at your zoning map, there are some areas where it's a yellow color, and I believe that is the 1 acre lot.
Okay.
I've got one.
The blade on those commercial windmills are gigantic.
Size of a
The
semi-truck.
the one blade, and when you're talking about the height, you know, it's way over 50 feet long. Probably are, I would say at least 100.
I watch them go down the
Yeah,
freeway.
okay.
Yeah, I've been right up
53
alongside
foot.
it,
They
yeah.
go under 53 sometimes.
They look like a wing on an airplane or something. Jet, big jet.
All right, so it sounds like you would like me to look into what some other standards look like where you might allow for more. We're going to look at ways to ensure that we have a clear distinction between commercial and private. If we do allow for an increase, we want to make sure we've got that buttoned up.
I think 2 acres is too little.
I mean, I'm gonna play devil's advocate here. What do you call a piece of property that has a whole bunch of windmills on it? You drive past it, you call it I call it a wind farm.
Still,
How you
for
gonna
that
tell-
big
how you
of
gonna tell a
piece of
farmer they can't
equipment
farm?
on 2 acres is almost ridiculous. It's gonna look like
It's what?
your land's gonna fly away with the propellers on it.
Okay,
I mean, if you really get into size in 2 acres and the proportion of the windmill, it would be
Two-
ridiculous to put one on.
2 acre square is 208 feet by 208 feet.
Just ridiculous.
So if you
That's
plant
all.
one right in the middle, 104 feet.
Still
If you
ridiculous.
go with this, I understand, but if you go with that 1.5 times multiply, you're somewhere in that 70 foot. Think about one right in the smack dab underneath, in the middle of it. Okay, so there you go.
In the middle, it's gonna be more than 70 foot from the middle.
But then it also can't be higher than 40 feet.
So the restriction is, for a private one, would be the height in the district, which would be 40 feet. For an agricultural one, it's 75 feet. And then you also have the restriction that it has to be 150% of the height setback from the property line. So that's what's going to keep the 2 acre parcel from looking ridiculous.
Right.
So you could fit one
'Cause you're talking
70-foot
about
one
3
in a
different
3 acre
entities
square
there.
in residential ag. And that basically means you could really only fit one every 2 acres. Because, you know, not that they're ever gonna fall towards each other with the wind going one
Where are you
direction,
gonna
but
put the house?
it's up to the homeowner, but, I mean, that's why we live here.
The direction of fall is not always necessarily about the wind blowing them over per se. It's about a failure of the structure, and it will crumple the way it crumples. So they have setback requirements from each other as well.
Yeah. And if you just
But
go
we
with that
do,
same-
we live, the reason why we live here is one thing, but we do have restrictions on how we live here. We do have a lot of restrictions, so it's not free for all, you just do whatever you want.
Okay, so I think I've got some direction on a couple of things that you want me to look at that I can bring back to you. If there are other things as you read through this, and you know, if there are some things that don't make sense or things that you think need clarification or changes that you want to make, by all means, let me know and we can look at that as well.
The only other question I had is, you know, throughout the whole thing with the winter solar was the annual inspection. How is that managed? Because it has to be followed up by the township.
It would
Who's
have
gonna
to
do
be.
that? And who's gonna remember to do that?
So we don't have any wind structures in the township now, so I don't know what
Okay.
that would be.
All right.
I think that some of that would probably fall in the building department. I'll say that while Ian's not paying attention.
I wonder if there's a way we could get a hold of what, you know, a wind farm type thing, you know, what type of inspections they go through. But once a year.
Well, we have private, and we have commercial, so we've got two different situations. Okay, let's move on.
Okay, moving on. So then the second one that we looked into was solar energy. And again, we did an audit of the zoning ordinance to see what you did allow. And all that the ordinance allows for at this point is a roof-mounted solar energy conversion system which would basically be panels on a roof, either a commercial or residential roof. It's not regulated in any other way that it's, except for going through the building permit process. And it's intended to be an integral part of the roof. And there are some standards that talk about how it should be aesthetically compatible with the structure itself. So we have had quite a few people that I've experienced over the last couple of years who have been coming in interested in doing ground-mounted systems. So that's, I don't know if you've seen these, but they tend to be on a small scaffolding type of structure, usually at a 45-degree angle facing the south to capitalize on this solar energy. But we do not allow those currently. So what I did do was just pull a sample ordinance together for you. Again, we're still interested in the same things: safety, aesthetics, access, etc. So access in the case of solar energy is a little different because trees, neighboring buildings, etc. could cut off the access to that solar energy. But at the same time, we also want to make sure, from an aesthetic standpoint, that we're protecting neighbors who maybe don't want to look at one of these structures. And so this ordinance talks about setback requirements, screening requirements, would only allow for it in a side or rear yard, ensuring that it's screened from the neighbors, ensuring that it's screened from the roadway, puts a maximum height of 15 feet on these structures. So that would be for, again, there's different scales. There's a private scale versus the commercial scale. In this sample ordinance, the commercial scale would have to be completely screened on all sides with a substantial buffer so that nobody would see it from an aesthetic standpoint. So if somebody wanted to convert a farm field per se into a solar farm, they could do that without, the neighbors having to look at what may be considered aesthetically unpleasing, I guess. Bart looks like he's got questions.
I mean, there's going to be reflectivity things thrown in here. You can't be reflecting all light to
Yep, there's
to your neighbor.
issues about glare, yeah.
Outside of that, how could anyone find something like this objectionable? It doesn't move, it doesn't make a noise, it sits there.
So on page 8,
The
it
fence
says-
that they may put up around it would probably be more, I don't know.
Yeah.
I don't know the details, but in California, they really had a lot of issues with solar panels as of lately, too. A lot of people up in arms, going to their local community officers and everything, and complaining and all that. So I don't know what all the issues are, but I might do a little research into what California's been doing. Because they've had a lot of problems with it. They kicked Bart out of there.
Oh, no.
Bart had those things off.
Please no.
They weren't according to
Please
code
don't
or
ever start a
anything.
rumor about me wanting to be in California and being upset.
Bart
about
says they
being
should
forced
allow
to.
anything.
Please don't throw me in the briar patch.
Paul, you see a lot of pad-mounted solar systems down in the Windsor area when I go over to Canada. People have them on 2 acres and 4 acres, and they even have them where the solar panel moves as the sun comes from the east to the west. It follows it. They're pretty cool. And I noticed that we had about a 15-foot height restriction on the pad mounts. And it's pretty close. Some go maybe about 20, but 15 to 20 on those. And they're pretty interesting. And they're on a slab of concrete with a footing, and they're kind of cool.
You know why the noise limit is different for the solar panels than it is for the windmills?
There's
The
noise for a
windmills are
solar panel.
55, and it says not exceeding 65. So then I looked up to see what is 65. I asked Siri, she told me that it was like standing next to a freeway. So I didn't know if that was a typo.
Well, to be honest with you, I pulled this in as a sample ordinance. I don't know why they would.
Oh, okay.
I don't know what kind of noise a solar panel might emit, to be honest with you.
If the mechanical ones, they stun ones, they're moving.
The solar panel falls.
I guess they can make engine noises when they're mechanical noises.
Smaller noise, creaking, whatever, but that's
the only thing I could think of now when you brought that up, because
Except
that's
off
the same
noise
thing,
of the
but
solar system.
if it's in other ordinances, there must be a reason why, but it'd be nice to kind of know where that came from.
A lot of people complain.
And if it should match the same as the wind one, if I got wind doing 55 and solar, which is why they're doing 60. You're saying today we can't have pad mounted or yard mounted solar panels?
Correct. I do know that
We did.
we have some.
Yeah, that should go away.
The restriction on,
Yeah.
yeah.
I mean, a person can afford to do that, who wants to do this to save, and unfortunately, the great biggest panel, the nicest one, points directly east. We could tell him to rotate his house, you know? You're gonna tell me every 2 weeks when you get out there and squeegee the thing's clean, you gotta go up on, 2.5 stories up? No.
What needs to be thrown out, say that again?
I don't think we should have any restriction that it has to be mounted to a building. Mounted on an existing structure.
So this draft language that I presented to you does allow for the ground-mounted systems, but then it also allows for commercial scale. So those are two considerations.
There's restrictions in the zoning ordinance that says how much of your property can be covered by man-made structure and, concrete, asphalt, things like that as well. A certain percentage, you can't go above it. So those type of things, I think, could come into play. Yeah, there's only so much percentage of your property you can cover with a shed or with a lean-to or with a garage or barn or shop or whatever. But I tell you, farming energy, it's there, and I think this is an interesting situation. It's there, it's yours to take, it's within the boundaries of your property. How do you restrict from telling anybody that they can't gather it? If Linda wanted to somehow put a big funnel above her barns and pull methane out of there, you're gonna tell her this is how big the funnel can be? I do.
That's next month's issue.
That's next month? Okay, so Cortez in here to regulate methane.
Methane capture is next, okay. Any other questions or concerns, items you want me to look at with regard to the solar issue?
We need to open this up.
All right, in that case, then, moving right along, the third item that we brought in front of you today is the issue of landscaping berms. So over the last couple of years, we have had a number of private residents who have, for one reason or another, wanted to install something, usually just a landscaping piece. Maybe they want some buffering from their neighbor or something to that nature. We do have standards in the ordinance when it comes to developing these if it's part of a site plan. So if somebody's bringing forth a commercial site plan for a new business or for a housing development or something like that, they would fall into these requirements. These requirements are not explicitly directed towards an individual homeowner if their home's already developed and they just wanted to come in and put something in. That's the case that we've seen recently. So the change that we're putting into the ordinance, or that we've suggested, is really just that we added in a section on landfilling and land alterations. There is already a requirement that you have to pull a permit from the township if you exceed the movement of 300 cubic yards or more, as well as proximity to rivers, lakes, and streams. But so then we also put this landscape berm exceeding 2 feet in height and 10 feet in length. Because once you start to get bigger than that, you could affect the drainage pattern, et cetera. So we wanted to make sure that that was explicitly related then back to this section that actually has the requirements. So I added all of that into your packets just for your information. Again, anything that's green and underlined is something we're suggesting. Everything else that's just red and black is something that's already in the ordinance. If we're suggesting the removal of something, there's a strike through it. So This one's really a very simple one. I think that at least one or more of you suggested you wanted to take a look at this, so this one feels like a real easy fix. We're not really changing any of the requirements, we're just making it explicit. So I'm happy to answer any questions about that one as well.
Beacon Lane, down here on Curtis Road, I think that's Beacon Lane, I can't, really, I know it's Beacon something. Would you allow berms in there? To me, it's a subdivision, a residential subdivision to me.
I don't know the particular neighborhood, but if somebody came in and they met the requirements and they submitted an application for it, I don't know why we wouldn't allow for it.
I know Pheasant Ridge or whatever it is, the one on the corner down there is way out of line, I think. I mean, you can barely see the fascia of the house. It's that high, and it looks like a pyramid, and there's no way it can be maintained. In here, do you have they must be maintained, mowed, and cared for?
That would be more of a property maintenance issue, I guess, than particularly a berm issue, but.
Well, no, if you're gonna put a berm up, either you put the thing up and don't make it an eyesore, like they got the long 1 foot grass already, and the guy on 7 Miles had the same thing, but even though he put evergreens down, that's okay, but you don't mow it, and you don't maintain it. And I think really there should be stuff in here, if you put a berm up of any size, especially if it's in I call it residential, as a subdivision. It should be maintained because that's an eyesore otherwise. It turns into that.
I think we could probably add some language that would deal with that.
I would appreciate to see that, really.
So, I guess some of them may not have grass on it per se, some of them may have other landscaping items. So I guess I'll have to think about how to craft that language to get to what you are interested
Well,
in.
as long as it's maintained, and you know, whether it be ground cover or grass, but to me, it should be able to be maintained. And when I say grass, is you got to be able to run a mower on it. The one down here off Curtis Road, there's no way that you can sit on a mower and mow that pyramid.
Okay.
Okay.
All you have in here, we have 1:4 ratio for the berm slope.
Yes,
Is that,
standard.
that's what we have right now. So you should be able to mow a 1:4 berm.
The application for that particular berm, the application didn't come in ahead of time, but they retroactively brought their application
No, I
in.
understand what I'm just saying.
They did demonstrate that they met the 1:4, so I don't know, I'm not tried to mow that one.
One quick question. Under this language, then, you need a permit if you're going to construct a berm that's 2 feet high by 10 feet.
That's like a grave site.
Seems,
I just buried my grandpa. There's a 2 foot mound by 10 foot. I'm building a berm. I gotta pull a permit.
I hope you're not putting them out by the road.
Well, that'll settle in later.
And honestly, to play devil's advocate here, if your property line is here and there's a hill, and you don't maintain or mow the hill,
So I
who
think
cares?
the difference in that is an existing topographical feature versus building something. And the reason that I threw that number in there was because I think 3 feet is kind of the typical requirement for a landscaping berm in the ordinance. If you're requiring it for screening purposes or something like that, that's the minimum that you would have to do. The concern that we've run across is that people start to change their grade, and usually when they're building something like this, a berm, they're putting it right up against the property line. And so my goal was to ensure that we're not sending our stormwater drainage off onto the neighbor's property.
Yeah, that has to be certainly passed by permit, that you're not changing, you cannot change the way water enters or exits your property. You can change how it flows, moves, whatever, through your own property, but you cannot change how it enters or exits. So a berm would straight up not be allowed if it, came down, deflected water, and crossed into a neighbor's property on either side. That would just straight up not be allowed.
But how do people know that?
Well, going through the permit process.
Yeah, so that's,
Yeah.
I was trying to trigger the permit process so that we could ensure that.
Yeah, but I mean, refer to that, it's a county requirement for runoff or something like that.
I wish it were, because I would love to pass the buck to the county, but every time this issue comes up, they don't have a regulation for that.
The way I learned about it was when I put in the cul-de-sac. And I had to prove to them by an elevation map that what I was doing did not change the way water ran through it.
Was that the drain office or the
Yeah.
road commissioner?
It was 20 years ago, that's what it was. So, but, I mean, that's the way you stop these things, if there's water coming either direction.
Yeah, but how do you catch it? How do you know? And now I'm gonna play devil's advocate, because people around here do whatever they want, whenever they want, most of the time.
God
So,
bless Salem.
that's right. And then, so like we've had someone on 7 Mile, I think in Miss Cook's neighborhood over there, not exact, but close by. But guy puts up a big berm, and apparently it doesn't have the best of relationship with his neighbor.
We're talking 7-angle tower.
No, 7 that way.
Acre, 7 and acre.
No, not that
No,
one. That's a
not
different
that
one.
Oh, they're just popping out of the woodwork.
So anyhow, regardless, he puts up a big berm because he's a landscape guy. The water runs and it was all of a sudden there, and then he doesn't maintain the neighbor's side, and the water's running off on the neighbor's property. That's the one example. So what do we do to ensure that people aren't doing this? And then they're all mad saying, well, you didn't have an ordinance. How am I supposed to know that I can't do that and have to
I bet you there's
fix
something you
it?
could probably refer to that, and yeah, John Paducas, he's the water guy at the county.
Evan Pratt.
Is it Kevin now?
Evan Pratt.
Evan Pratt, there you go.
John and
Paul-
Bart.
Evan Proud is the,
Oh, yeah?
he's the drain commissioner. You're not talking about the drain commissioner, you're talking about the county engineer or something like that.
Yeah, and it's like whoever you would talk to about ponds and doing stuff in your streams, and anything that's going on with Kalo here, his water could not be disturbed the way it came in, and it could not be disturbed the way it went
But
out.
Kalo knows that stuff.
Yeah,
because
but I
of
mean, that's,
excavation.
I'd
But
just say,
the
as long as the
residents
county,
don't.
prove that the county has approved what you're doing for water ingress, egress.
So I'll tell you, just because this has been such a wet spring, I've dealt with a number of property drainage issues. When you're coming to a commercial site plan like the Kalo site, and they're discharging into a county-regulated stream, then the county will look at it, they will permit it, they'll make sure it meets all your regulations. If it's a situation between resident A and resident B in an established subdivision or established neighborhood, the county is not gonna get involved in that.
True.
And what they've told me is that it falls under, more of a a civil issue between neighbors, and maybe it falls under some kind of state drainage code, which seems very nebulous because nobody can point me directly to what that is. So short of doing that, I think this is a better solution in terms of just putting something black and white in our local ordinance that gives us the ability to deal with it. Because 9 times out of 10, those people are calling, well, Ann. You're calling Ann. And so then this gives us
Don't change that part.
a really quick ability to point to something in our ordinance that says that. And so I did add the landscape berm. Berm shall be set back with enough distance from the property line to accommodate a swale that would direct the storm discharge, so it won't directly discharge onto a neighboring property. So just kind of taking what we already have and adding a little bit extra to deal with some of these issues that have been coming up.
I have a question for you too. What do you think would be, that being said, to give residents some sort of guidance without overburdening, what do you think the numbers should be?
Numbers for what?
To
How high a berm could be, how long?
To
a berm-
require
Well,
permit,
to
2 foot by
require a
10
permit.
foot.
What would you see as reasonable? I knew you were gonna say none, but what was
If I want to put up a berm on my property, I want to put up a berm on my property.
Right.
Yeah, but Paul said in the ordinance, though, there is language that addresses the water drainage, correct? That they have to.
Proposed language.
Yes.
So I think what,
So instead of making a footage requirement, the water drain off, whether it's 10 feet long or 20 feet long, might be more important,
So-
correct?
So let me get this straight. We put solar panels on a rack, and we get complaints, so we have to put up a fence around it. But if we want to put up a berm, oh jeez, I could just, okay.
Any ideas on the question asked and unanswered, any ideas on how to trigger the permit process so that someone gets a chance to look at whether or not it's going to affect runoff to the neighbor?
We
Or
have
use what's left of
requirements for fences, right? Yep, if you're putting up a fence on your boundary, you gotta pull a permit, get the fence approved, right?
yep.
Okay, berms are a type of fence.
Define,
So you're saying you
Fine.
want any amount of berming to require a permit?
No, I don't wanna pull a permit for anything. You know,
So Pam's question was, what would be the threshold then?
But this is the, you're doing something that is aesthetically affecting your, can affect what your neighbor sees now. Once again, it's my property, and, you can put up a fence on your property if you don't want to look at the berm on my property. Knock your socks off. But, I mean, if the group believes that a berm is something they have a permit, okay. If they do okay, someone comes in and says, I want to put up a berm like this, I've proven that it's a peak, water not going to get affected at all, and the township approves the berm. Yep, okay, yeah, it's 6 foot high, it's a 1 to 4 height, and you don't have to weed whack the thing on either side of it if you don't want to, and the neighbor hates it. What have we done? Nothing. The neighbor still hates it. Complainers will complain. So are we trying to stop the neighbors from complaining, or are we trying to restrict something from a safety aspect, from a damage to neighbors' property aspect? I mean, those are the things you can touch. But if a person looks at it and says, I don't like that, it's, sorry. I think pink Cadillacs are atrocious, but, they're out there.
Yeah.
I think the concern should be drainage. The berm is a material. You can get into the aesthetic stuff, that's in a different realm. Basically, some language that says, you can't construct, not specifically by measurement, but any kind of,
Land alteration.
yeah, land alteration that negatively affects drainage, then that would be there, and if there was a problem, then we would have that language, and they would have to correct it if they did something that's
Yeah, the
channeling
swale
water
on
all
the-
going to the neighbor.
the
But
swale
as
on the
far
neighbor
as
side is
deciding what size berm is gonna affect drainage and having it applicable to all situations, it's impossible. I think your concern is drainage.
Or maybe it becomes a berm has to be within a certain setback of the property line, period. If you say it's gotta be 60 feet back from, that allows whatever to come back for, if it's 100 feet long, it's gotta be 50 feet from the boundary line. If it's 200 feet long, it's gotta be 100 feet from the boundary line. So that allows water to come back or whatever, make some sort of assumption along those lines.
Depending on the property, that could be negative.
Yeah, and then maybe
The
it self-restricts.
topography
and I
of the
can't put up with
property
it, but-
could be such that by doing that, it creates a situation.
Yeah,
I
there's-
think
You could,
the bottom line is just, if they do something that affects drainage,
it's got to
And
be
it's gotta
safety
be
and environmental
removed, yeah.
concerns. That's the only thing.
So how do you communicate that? How do you create a
you
process?
can put
for
some
that?
language in on drainage. That's all.
I can't agree with
And
what
because
you-
the way our township operates is that we are reactive, not proactive. We don't have an ordinance officer. So we don't have somebody that goes around and, like you said, on berms, like if it's a new construction or whatever, the site plans are gonna determine exactly what they do. And the other thing on berms about cutting lawn and everything, most people that I know of, 90-some%, put some kind of shrubs or trees on a berm because they don't want to be messing with it.
Mhm. Okay, well, I'll look at the trigger, whether it be proximity to a property line or something that deals with drainage, but I can certainly come up with some language that I think deals with the questions that go on. And you mentioned the maintenance issue, and I think we
Yeah.
can add something.
What's
I
the,
wanted to ask, there was a house, it's a question, it's on a corner, but the back end of it is wetlands.
Okay?
Okay, and the house is up and towards the front of the property. Is it permissible for me to go ahead and put a berm across the back so that swamp or the wetlands don't come forward and start filling in my backyard with water?
If you're doing land alterations, if you're doing some land alteration that's not in the influence of a wetland, it would be permissible. I mean, so if you were doing something where you were actually touching or affecting the wetland, then you may have to get a permit from the state. But if you're doing something on the upland area, you're not changing the drainage pattern, you should be okay.
Okay.
Is this a personal question? You want to come in the office and talk to me on Wednesday? Or?
No personal questions in meetings.
No.
what's the end that we're trying to get to? We're trying to allow or prevent what? Just let's, short answer, fill in the blank. We are trying to allow this and or prevent this.
We're trying to prevent the land alteration from negatively affecting the neighboring properties.
Okay, and what, give me top 5 negative effects.
I'll give you the two that have been brought to my attention. One is the drainage, one is the aesthetics.
Okay, one of those will hold up.
There's,
You know, you don't like the way that looks, look away. That's, you know, sorry. I mean,
There's been some big lawsuits ran out over aesthetics.
well, then you need to look at the judges.
there are 200 things in your ordinance that deal with aesthetics, so I mean,
Yeah.
that's a whole different issue than what we're.
Okay, so if we're dealing with the aesthetic side, are we saying that, okay, the berm shall be, you know, used with this ryegrass or the Salem mix that you get up here in 10 Mile, or has to be stones, has to be this, and you have to beautify it?
Well, I think the
Is that what we're leaning towards? I mean, if it's aesthetics, okay, how do you address aesthetics? I'm just gonna keep drilling down on these
I
things.
think the piece that Darrell was talking about
Yeah.
was making sure that it's well maintained. We don't have any specifics about what you do or don't need to put on it.
As long as you maintain it.
If the berm's made out of concrete, I don't have to do any maintenance, is that okay?
As long as it doesn't start to crumble, if it does, then you gotta fix it.
I don't know, I don't know if I'm on board
But
with this whole
that-
aesthetics thing.
Yeah, I mean, one of those is gonna hold up, and aesthetics isn't gonna be one of them. And I'll go right back to, at the transition of your property line to your neighbors, it goes to 100%, you know, grade. It can't be mowed, it's covered with weeds. Well,
You tell me what you want to do. This
I
is
think-
your ordinance. I'm
Yeah,
happy to make it the way you all want it. I'm going
If
based on the direction that I've been given so
if
far.
it's, yeah, I think you concentrate on safety and environmental. It can't,
What's wrong
you
with
know,
mowing the thing? I can't, that one, I drive by that house over there and I think it's disgusting. 1 foot high grass.
where?
What's the purpose of having a berm that high?
I let 14 acres of mowed grass on my property go back to nature. Now I've got berry bushes and a bazillion different types of
But
trees.
that's what you're looking at. It's not what John Doe Public is looking at, or a neighbor.
Oh, it's right up against the road and right up against my neighbors. It is.
Maintaining, if you're gonna put one in, especially where, if you live in a your berm is gonna go in a residential area, not a farmland.
Okay.
And, you know, not where you have 10-acre parcels. You have 2-acre parcels, and you can see your neighbor. Do you wanna look at that big hill? I mean, and and it's like, built like a pyramid. There's no way you can put a mower on and cut it, other than let the weeds grow.
I gotta go take a look at this thing.
Actually, on those big
Well,
berms,
maybe there's
One
something,
second, just one second.
a transition between residential and like a res ag or something like that. That could certainly, you know, if it's, you know, whatever, however we define our different residential area, there are different areas. If it's purely neighborhood, then I could see something like that possibly. And, you know, and certainly neighborhoods form their own little associations, and we have arguments over fences and pools and
Not all of them.
temporary volleyball nets and God only knows what else.
Dan,
But, you know,
I'm just saying Daryl's situation, if you wanted to, you could have a requirement on berms, the large berms that you're talking about, when they're getting
I've heard
over,
it for 7 years.
over 3 feet or whatever you think would be appropriate, that they have appropriate foliage on it, whether it be shrubs or trees or whatever, so that it's maintenance free.
True, yeah, then put a ground cover on the
Yeah,
stuff
that
instead
would
of
be
grass seed or,
That would come under appropriate foliage.
you don't have to mow the ground cover.
California, they have the big hills, and that's what they do. They put.
So they don't wash
They
away.
put ground cover, and it's beautiful, full of flowers and everything else.
Yeah.
You know, I know my son lived off of, his place was right on the edge of a great big one, and it was all the way down, it's just growth. You know,
okay,
it's
I have a
beautiful.
question for all of you. How big a deal is it to have manicured berms, or does it matter where they're located? I'm gonna start with, I'm just curious. Before we keep
And they don't
going on
have-
and going on and arguing about this, I mean, let's,
It doesn't have to be manicured, but as long as they're maintained. You get something that's so large where you can't put a mower on, you can't maintain that. I think the word maintain.
I don't think we're talking about can, I think we're talking about if we create an ordinance, a rule, you have to maintain it or not. How they do it, what they do it with, I don't think that's really our business. But how far do we want, I mean, we're an agricultural community. I see a lot of berms that have just gone natural. And quite frankly, do they look the best? No, but do I feel that it's any of my business? No. So I just, I'm not trying to override you, I'm just saying that's my opinion.
Residential area.
Okay, so that's your point, it's in the residential area. Okay, so are you talking about something on Curry Road, or Curtis?
Yep.
So if it's on the outside in that public road, does that count as being in residential because it's actually on their property?
It's right along the tree line. In fact, it's right up to the tree line.
Bruce, what are your
You
thoughts?
know, so it's, I don't know.
this is, okay, someone tell, where is this thing?
Just a second, sure.
Pheasant
Just,
Ridge.
excuse me, I would like to hear.
We're in a rural
Okay, sorry.
community and, you know, you've got to allow for some of that stuff, but it relates to private roads and subdivisions are going to have to pick up some of that in their own, you know, in their own rules, wherever, if they want to start restricting some of that, but as it relates to the township, it's a rural community, and, you know, we've got to be reasonable, but I think having, and again, the commentary part of it is having the ability to have the word aesthetics in there, just to give all the ability to at least talk to people when they come in and discuss that with them in case they didn't think through something, is helpful. But the define is, you know, aesthetically pleasing, wherever it is, it gets to be problematic. It's just, if there's anything, if that becomes helpful for them, that's great, but I can't define it either, because we're in a rural community.
Right, and Dan, what do you think, just in a nutshell?
In a nutshell.
What are you looking
You know,
for?
I think it's, like it was mentioned, it's a rural community. We have people doing all kinds of crazy things in this township, and nobody does anything about it, and, you know, I could go on and on. I think the biggest concern is what I said originally, is the drainage. Other than that, other
Aesthetics.
areas can handle it. Normally, the way the procedure is in this township, if somebody's upset about a neighbor or whatever, they come to the township, and the township addresses it, okay? And we don't have an ordinance officer, so, you know.
But back to the aesthetics, we're talking about creating a rule for aesthetics.
Well, you could have that it has proper foliage, period. It's very simple language, it covers a lot of ground, they come in, they say they're gonna build a berm, you say, okay, it's not bothering the drainage or anything, it looks like it's okay, but make sure you have proper foliage on it. We can't have a bunch of wild stuff growing all over the place on it because it doesn't look right.
Okay, Bob?
Yeah, the aesthetics are pretty tough to tell somebody what to plant on their berm. I mean, you can have manicured berms, or you can have wildflowers and native plants, and they get kind of bushy and crazy. But the water is an issue, the drainage for the water, and then on some of these areas where it's more of a subdivision, let their HOAs determine what they want to see on their berms.
Okay. Anything else to add?
Aesthetics in a, I don't know what you want to call it, an association, certainly let it up to association. If it's a non-association and maybe it's, residential only, it's not res ag or something, okay, maybe you do, maybe there is some sort of aesthetic restriction there. Anywhere else? Not a
Okay.
chance.
All right.
Not a chance.
Paul, does that provide?
Yes, it does.
Okay, thank you. All right. Anything else on berms? Nope. Okay, I'll take that as moving on to fences around pools versus auto pool covers.
All right, so these are the items that were essentially administrative cleanup items, things that we've been dealing with that we recognized probably needed to be updated. The building code now allows for auto covers. Our ordinance says that you must have a 4-foot fence. It does give the zoning administrator the discretion, but instead of having an explicitly needed 4-foot fence, when the building code allows for these automatic pool covers as a safety issue, I thought it would be appropriate to put that in as well, so we can just kind of take care of that administrative item. Are there any questions about that one?
Yes, so you're giving the homeowner a choice between, you can have a fence or no fence if you have the pool cover.
Correct.
Now, if you decide not to have a fence and you have this pool cover, somebody falls into this pool cover, it's very easy to get out.
To be honest, I don't know the technical details of these pool covers, but I do know that I went to building officials in my office as well as talking to the building official for the township, and they showed me the part in the 2015 building code that allows for these as an alternative. So if the state has deemed it acceptable,
This is like some sort of composite, something that scrolls out and you can literally walk across it, type of thing? Well,
I'm not going to walk across it.
but I mean, that's what we're talking about. We're talking about preventing accidental drowning. Person didn't realize their phone.
Yes,
Pulls
correct.
their UPS guys walk into the back door, whatever.
Well, if the state,
State building code allows for it, so
Yeah.
there's not much that I can do to push back against that when people
Yeah,
come
no, that's-
offering this. So I guess from an administrative standpoint, updating the ordinance to be consistent with the current state statutes makes sense to me.
makes sense to me.
Yeah, I just wonder what the system is that decides when it opens and when it closes, because the fence is always there.
Right.
The power goes out, my fence is still there. But who can question government?
Wow.
No.
I've been a swimmer my whole life, and I would never have a pool in my backyard, and I'm a maniac when it comes to my kids, and anybody else's kids I see around waters. From my own opinions. But it's a state statute, and,
Yeah, that's what.
people gotta be responsible for themselves, right, Bart?
You don't even want to start that.
All right.
That's another whole meeting.
Second item has to do with the posting of signs as required for public hearings. Our ordinance still has this in it, but the Zoning Enabling Act was amended. It used to have these requirements that our ordinance mimics, basically, that you have to put up a sign with very specific specifications if there's a rezoning or conditional use, etc. It really becomes kind of a cumbersome process for both us on the administrative side as well as the property owner, whoever the applicant is. you all may recall recently, we tried to hold a public hearing. I think it was one of the first times I was with you guys, and the applicant hadn't put up the appropriate sign, and somebody called us on it, so we had to make
That's
them,
right.
we redid the hearing and made them put the sign up.
I don't think hardly
Signs don't tend to be too
half
effective.
of a percent of the people in the township wouldn't even know about it,
Yeah.
okay?
And
I
so-
think it's not, I think it could be deleted.
Yep, so that's why we've taken that out of there, just to bring this in line with the state statute and get rid of that kind of encumbrance for the folks who
The
are.
language, could you put the language in there that it would be in accordance with the state language?
Well, I've just taken it out altogether.
Okay, good.
And then the last item, we did an update, as you recall, to the township private road ordinance. We did an amendment to the zoning ordinance to reference that. What we did do, though, was leave the same old zoning, private road ordinance number in there. And so what you see then is the new private road ordinance that we're referencing. So that's really just a basic cleanup. That's all we got for those for right now. There may be others that come along. With any zoning ordinance amendment, it's something that you would make a recommendation to the township board about. At this point, I'm just introducing them to you. These last couple, I think, are probably pretty simple. We could go forward if you wanted to set a public hearing to deal with those. We could kind of try to tackle all of these ordinance updates at the same time. The point of bringing these others to you was just kind of introduce it to get the conversation flowing so that I could really get a better understanding from you all of what you want to have here. So now I can take the comments that you provided, I've taken notes on back and kind of rework some of these things and bring them back to you for further discussion. And then hopefully after that point, we could set a public hearing. With the public hearing, you would ultimately make a recommendation to the township board, who has the authority to update the zoning ordinance.
All right. Number 8, old business items, none. 9, approval of the minutes for June 17th, 2019.
Make a motion to approve the draft portion of the June 17th, 2019 minutes of the meeting.
Second.
All those in favor of approving the minutes of June 17th, 2019, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? None. Minutes are approved. Reports of correspondence. No TJ today. ZBA,
Nothing.
land preservation.
Nothing new, waiting tomorrow.
Okay. Planning consultant report. Number 10, public comment. Ms. Bonnie.
No, you just were talking about posted signs when you change the zoning rules, right? When you change the zoning for a piece of property. You still send out mailings to the people who are relatively within a certain amount? Well, I have to let you know on a story that about happened, that they changed the zoning, or tried to change the zoning on that little party store that's across from me on 7 Mile Road. It didn't get changed because when I found out after they posted it, I asked the neighbors, and the neighbors got letters, and then we decided that it wasn't going to be a class 2 or a class 3, so they could have big business there. Anyways, when we all found out, was because I saw the sign and I didn't live within the required distance. Now, anybody in the neighbor, in the whole area can drive through, and if they find some reasonable reason why the area shouldn't be done, rezoned, they can talk to each other. If you don't have them put up a sign like you're going to not do anymore, we're going to lose we're not going to know about it. It's going to be done behind our backs, basically. That's what I got to say. Oh, and I believe pool fences are always there, power in or power out.
Mr. Kress.
Got one of them.
I need to follow the formal requirements.
No, not today. It's a light crowd.
Yeah, I'm
I'm the one that has inflicted the solar and wind power discussion on you guys. And the reason why I've done that is because I'm kind of concerned there's some large open areas in the township that could be used for wind farms or could be used for solar arrays. And been a lot of contention within the state of Michigan, in the Thumb area in particular, about wind farms and the problems that people have with them. I have some friends in Texas who just discovered that there's a wind farm going in the ranch right across from them, and they were a little concerned, and because they were never informed this was going to happen. So my original question to Pam was, are there any applications that are pending for the implementation of wind farms or windmills or solar panels or solar areas? And I was doing some additional reading, and I don't know how many of you guys know this, but last year the United Kingdom was without power for 6 days because they had no wind, and they were depending on wind power. So it's not a particularly reliable source. If you take a look to handle the increase in electrical usage that's projected over the next 5 years or so in the UK, you would have to cover almost 1/3 of the total land area of the UK and Ireland with windmills in order to provide it. And if you wanted to do it with solar, you would have to cover the entire land area of the UK and Ireland to provide it. So I'm not a big fan of solar, and I'm not a big fan of wind. In Hawaii, on the Big Island, if you go down to the south end of the Big Island, you'll see a wonderful array of disintegrating windmills, which was a total failure for wind energy in an area that actually gets a lot of wind. So I'm just concerned that there would be some way that we'd be notified that if DTE and all of their infinite despotic glory decides to impose solar farms on us, we need to know, or windmills, we need to know. And I don't know how we do that within the construct of the Planning Commission or the board, but it's certainly something we need to consider because DTE will do it, and they will avoid notifying anybody as long as they can, just like they did with all the smart meters that they snuck up and stuck on people's houses and then ran away. So that's a concern of mine. Also ties into a recent U.S. Supreme Court decision that allows people now to utilize the Fifth Amendment to the Constitution to sue the local government for taking if you reduce the value of their property. So you can actually sue the government for the amount of reduction of the value of your property. Somebody puts in I live off of the Salem Hills Golf Course. If somebody puts in a wind farm in the Salem Hills Golf Course, my property value is going to go way down. And you can be certain I'm going to be going after somebody for that reduction in property value. So I can do that. That may also happen with the people in the USD. And that was my concern that I brought up to Gary and Pam, is that the Planning Commission needs to, or at least the board needs to be able to understand that they can be held accountable in that fashion. And it represents a threat to the township. So.
Thank you.
Oh, but the other thing, in the UK, they've found two other additional things. The 55 decibel sound value for windmills has actually been reduced because they were generating low frequency sound waves that were being very irritating to people. They were preventing people from sleeping and caused other problems. They also wound up with about a requirement that wind farms be closer than a half mile to any residential district. So those are a couple of things.
one of the critical things that we didn't discuss tonight that I thought of afterwards, because
Because I talked to these engineers in Palm Springs about the windmills, I was curious, is noise, ground vibration is substantial. So if you're in close proximity to them, they're gonna drive you crazy.
And isn't there a whole canyon area?
Yeah,
in
yeah,
California?
yeah, that's between the mountains kind of, and
They had
it's
to
kind of
shut
like a
that-
wind tunnel,
Yeah,
you
they had
know?
to shut that down because it was, I think the windmills were destroying themselves.
Yeah, there's a lot of negatives that people don't think about. It sounds real good. Oh yeah, put a windmill in, we get all this electricity, sounds good, free, you know? But the same thing with solar panels. All kinds of problems associated with solar panels. You don't think of it when you just casually think of solar panel. Well, it sounds good, free electricity in the sun.
Yeah, I wanted to.
Why don't we do that? But there's all kinds of problems with solar panels, and like I said, California has got all kinds of controversy going on over solar panels. I don't know what the specifics are, but I know there's a lot of problems they have, because they have a lot of them out there.
Yeah, well, if you go into the desert areas in Arizona and New Mexico and those areas where they've got these huge collections of mirrors that reflect sunlight into a concentrated section of solar panels, those are self-destructing rather spectacularly.
Transistors don't last forever.
A lot of maintenance on the windmills too. That's the other thing.
About the only thing you have to do to prevent a person from putting up, I'll say, a large windmill, is have them look at the business case. They're horrible.
Oh, yeah, I know, actually.
I mean, the only reason these wind farms cropped up is because of our
People in
government
California.
being in charge of it and pumping incentive dollars into it.
That's correct.
And the maintenance and the lifespan of these things the lifespan is nothing and the maintenance is horrific.
Correct.
I mean, they do absolutely self-destruct. And you gotta be in and out of the business of a specific windmill in probably about 7 years. In and out of the business of it. Get rid of that windmill before 7 years.
I actually had one quoted
Yeah.
for my property for my personal use because I wanted to get it off the grid because of my positive relationship with BTE. And it's going to be $40,000. It's going to be $40,000 and it was going to have to be 70 feet tall because I live in the woods.
And
Yeah.
your windmill is only as good as your battery storage
Correct.
and how big your battery bank is.
Correct.
Go look what you can get out of a whole bunch of DC brushless RC airplane motors or the motor off of a treadmill, literally, and put it straight back in. So go look at what you can do with that for like $30 a parts. It's ridiculous. It is. People are
Okay.
scavenging treadmills because of the number of windings and the poles on the treadmill. They're perfect.
So treadmills are good for batteries and hanging up clothes. That's what I understand. Okay. Anyone else? Thank you, guys. Chairperson comments, no, I think we've said it all. Okay, we are adjourned at 8:48. Thank you.
Thank you.
With Gary.
Yeah, I know exactly what
That's
this is now.
why
I am like, my curiosity
That
is
explains
getting
it.
peaked.
I was thinking, I was reporting, rainforest, and all that. He says, don't you